we eat it, and importantly, right, because whoever gets to define gets to tell us. So, Dred Scott v. Sanford, Dred Scott, you're not a people. You can't even come to court. Why? You're not even a slave. You're a property. You have no more standing than a table or a horse.
Oh, whoa.
Same thing. Right?
Oh,
Fetus,
cool.
you're not really alive. Why? Because we, the court, say so. Does that match biological? Is any biological process going on in a fetus? Of course it is. Does it qualify as an entity? No. Why? Because the court says so.
Which one is that?
Roe versus Wade is that last one. Okay? So, can you use the dictionary as evidence in a trial?
No.
Why not?
Because someone doesn't. They said so. It's like somebody's opinion.
True, but so is the opinion of the court. We even call them opinions.
It can only be used for, like,
Aid to memory.
aid to memory.
Why? Because the court says so. Is Nix versus Hedden a judicially active or a judicially restrained decision?
Restrained. Active. Wait. Active inside of it. Necessarily dictionary definition.
Let's review once we talk
They
about the next
decided-
case, Riggs versus Palmer.
Because there's nowhere in the law where it says vegetables are
Good. It uses the word vegetable, but then it doesn't go on to tell us what that includes. And
Yeah.
so they have to interpret for the legislature because the law was incomplete. And so they say, what did the people mean? Whatever they meant, the meaning of vegetable hasn't changed. So when they were thinking vegetable or fruit, tomato fell into vegetable, not fruit. So it is a active decision filling in the words left blank by the legislature.
In Nixon, which one was the one that wanted tomato? Not, who was the merchant that was upset about tomato?
Nix is, Hedden is the merchant, Nix is the tax person.
So Nixon arguing it's a fruit.
Nix wants to tax it, and Hedden says that's ridiculous. Yeah, okay. It is. Is Riggs versus Palmer active?
Yes.
How?
They didn't do it straight to the letter of the law.
What happens in the case?
A boy kills his grandfather to get the inheritance money. He goes to jail, and when he gets out, he wants the inheritance money.
And does the court give him the money?
No.
Why?
because you
Even
can't.
though the law says he should.
Because you can't profit
can't-
from your own
can't-
wrongdoing.
No person should profit from their own crime. And if the writers of the law had thought of it, they'd have included this, but it never occurred to them. How do we know that? Because it's a self-evident truth. It is as judicially active a decision as ever there was. We need not be much concerned with the general language contained in the laws. That astonishing. I'm hoping that he didn't think what that sentence might actually mean, because if every judge used that, I don't really need to pay attention to the law. I'm just going to tell you what I think is best. Now, as it turns out, every one of us on a moral standpoint agrees with him. There's no one who I've ever met who doesn't, but lots of people think he should still get the money because the legal standpoint is going to count more for a variety of reasons than what you and I think is morally appropriate. Now, the legislature in every state has gone back and changed that. So that was the beginning of those. Yes.
How many of the justices voted that he should get the farm?
It's a 3-judge panel, 2 voted for, and the 1 judge you read, the dissenting opinion, Justice
Wait.
Gray, decided against.
But at the end, it says all something agreed with this person, and then this person read it, and 1 person followed him. At the end of the text I read.
I'll look back and see. I might be wrong about that. I'll look back and see. I
Okay.
think it was a 3-judge panel, though, but I'll check.
Okay.
Lily?
Wait, so which ones are active?
They're both active. The never was a more active decision made than Roe v. Wade. It is the most activist decision. Yep. Because all of them are examples of the court trying to tell the rest of us what is true based upon their reading of the available evidence in spite of the law that's in place. Now, that said, Dred Scott v. Sanford is the single most restrained decision ever. Why? Anybody know? Dred Scott is the one, he's a slave, and yes.
Because they use the law to rule that slaves were property, even though.
They didn't just use the law, they used the Constitution, because the Constitution defined people of African descent as 3/5 of a person. And so Justice Taney, worst Supreme Court justice ever, and that's saying a lot, said, I'm reading the Constitution and I don't believe in judicial activism, I believe in judicial restraint, and so even though this person's standing before me and he's very clearly a person, the Constitution will not allow me to define him as a person, therefore he's not. He's 3/5 of the people. Right? So he's property because the Constitution says he is, in spite of the obvious truth that he's a people. Right? And so sometimes judicial activism gets you in trouble, sometimes judicial restraint gets you in trouble, but you need a guideline and you need to know what you're trying to do and what do you want your judges doing. In Dred Scott, you want your judges, I hope, you want your judges deciding for the person. In some others, depending on how you feel about a woman's right to an abortion, you might not want your judges to be quite so active. Or you might. Depends on what you think is really. It says not a word.
So that's why they. So even if they would restrain it, how could they even?
Because what they'd have said. How detailed an answer do you want?
I don't need a
The Ninth Amendment.
Tyler.
The Ninth Amendment says that you have citizens have rights that aren't yet written down. You may have some rights that aren't yet included, and the court took that and looked at the other rights you had and interpreted from it that people have a right to privacy. And one of the most private decisions is a woman's reproductive rights. And so what the court said is, even though the word abortion, even though reproductive rights, even though those things aren't in the Constitution generally protects privacy, even though that word's not used, and therefore we protect a woman's right to an abortion. But, they said, we also acknowledge that after the first trimester, once the fetus has kicked, it starts to become a life. At that point, from legal purposes, at that point it has life and therefore it begins to get the rights. So but it was pretty broadly interpreting, because in the Constitution also says if it's not in here, it's left up to the states to decide. And then the state government in each state, Texas could have said abortion illegal, Oklahoma could have said legal. And what made people mad was not so much that they protected privacy, but that they took the issue away from the states. Okay? And so it was it was really as active as it could be. All right.
What's that one called again?
Roe v. Wade. Okay? And then there are a few questions, and they are on the short story, Country of the Blind. And those are just textual questions. Keeping you honest. Alright? Now, don't spend a lot of time on the interpretation notes that you have taken. Spend more time on the have I been paying attention in class and to the reading kind of things. Alright? Don't trick yourself. I am not trying to trick you. Don't think that I am. Don't try to read into it. And in a couple of places where I have asked a tricky question, I've even indicated this might be a trick question. Okay? I'm sorry? Oh, see, that would be super cool, and I hadn't thought of it. But there's a little while before we have to take this test, so...
Wait, Sadie, what did you say?
What if I... It gave me the great idea that what if I added the word, this might be a trick question, and that in itself was the trick?
Oh my God.
Exactly.
But now that you've said
But
that...
that's according to you.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that. This is not designed, truly it is not designed
You've
to
already
be
put it in our
punitive.
heads, so
It is
we're going to
designed
overthink it anyway.
have you been alert. Sorry, what?
One question.
I'm not that guy. I have issues, that's not one of them.
So are any of the questions going to be like a true, like they could be true or false?
No. There is no interpretive question that allows you to say one or the other. I've been very careful about that. Mostly because I don't want to have that conversation with you afterward. Well, this one might be true, and here's why. Because that is such a center kid thing to do. And I so don't want to have that conversation with you. Any of you.
But you can't dispute that if the test was like that or it was interpreted,
Oh,
it would be reasonable for us to
here's the deal. If I have written an unreasonable question, and that's certainly possible, I will be happy to review it, okay? But I assure you that I've made every effort for them not to be unreasonable, okay? All right, now, essays. A couple of things to keep in mind as you write your essays, and for those of you who have yet to think about or start your essay, also to keep in mind. One, have a thesis. A thesis is not a statement of fact. A thesis is a defendable statement based upon the evidence that you use. Choose something that you can defend. If the evidence suggests that your thesis is wrong, what should you do? Change your thesis. Let the evidence dictate the thesis, not your thesis, and then find selectively evidence to help you prove it. That's also workable, a little less desirable. Let the evidence speak. I've given you some that says there is truth, and I've given you some that says there isn't truth, and I've given you some that says there's sort of truth, but how we access it is unusual. Choose somewhere in between. If you have mutually exclusive and contradictory evidence, I would recommend, if you can't find the path that brings them together and harmonizes them, that you not use both of those pieces of evidence. If you do, account for why there is confusion. Okay? Have a thesis, defend it, make sure that your evidence matches it. If your evidence doesn't, change your thesis. Okay? Be directional. If not linear, be directional. If we're in Los Angeles and we're going to New York, a stop in Miami doesn't make sense. Okay? It might make sense to take the southern route and pick your way through Kentucky, or the northern route and see parts of Michigan. But it wouldn't make sense to see Kentucky and Michigan on your way to New York. Okay? Too long and too confusing. And if you go to Rio, you're in a different paper altogether. Okay? Linear. When you're in Colorado, Kansas needs to be your next step. Next to Colorado. Okay? Don't skip over Kansas and say magically now we're in Ohio. You've missed a couple of lines of states. Show me how you're getting there. Last comment. Each paragraph should be about one idea. Each paragraph should be about one idea. That doesn't mean one piece of evidence. If you're using the raft of the Medusa, it could be 2 pages of discussion on the raft of the Medusa. But it needs to be one idea per paragraph. And then it needs to logically build to the next idea. From Kansas, you go to Missouri. Yes?
As for like using the evidence as an argument to like back up what we have in our thesis, I'm kind of confused on, can we use our evidence to say like, some of our evidence could be, this is what is not true, like, is this in Jericho's Raft of the
If you're
Medusa?
using Jericho's Raft of the Medusa as an example of getting it wrong, absolutely. Here is the danger. The reason we need, if you were saying Jericho is wrong, here's how to go about it. The reason that emotions let us down, and romanticism got it wrong, is this. Here's what that was about, here's what Jericho tries to tell us, he misses the point. That's fine. That's an acceptable use of evidence.